The case of Victor Alexander Pujol is a deeply disturbing and terrible tale that took place in the quaint village of Sunrise, Florida, in the United States of America. Reina, Pujol's ex-girlfriend, and her two small children were brutally murdered in this case. Reina was also the mother of the four children. The events that took place show a story of intentional brutality, betrayal, and the unraveling of a horrible crime through a succession of disturbing actions and confessions. This story is revealed through the events that followed. During the day that would forever change the course of events, Victor Alexander Pujol made his way to the residence of Reina's father under the guise of acquiring clothing for the children that he shared with Reina. As the day went, this visit, which at first glance appeared to be harmless, suddenly took on a more menacing tone. After some time had passed, it would be determined that Pujol's behavior and actions were part of a deliberate strategy to disguise his tracks. Immediately after his visit, Pujol went to a pawn shop in the neighborhood where he pawned a tablet that belonged to one of Reina's children. Not only did Pujol receive a modest sum of money as a result of this act of pawning the tablet, but it also demonstrated a concerning lack of attachment to the seriousness of the activities he had taken in the past. After some time had passed, the tablet, which was a personal object, would prove to be an essential piece of evidence that connected him to the crime. In the later hours of that day, Pujol confided in his close friend Crystal, delivering a confession that was both devastating and shocking. Crystal was shocked when Pujol confided to her that he had performed the unthinkable. He had killed Reina and her children. Crystal made the decision to take immediate action, despite the fact that she was initially unable to appreciate the significance of his confession. In an attempt to check the horrifying accusations that Pujol had made, Crystal made an attempt to go to Reina's house while she was in a state of panic and denial. It was her hope that Pujol's confession was some kind of sick joke or an error, and her objective was to make sure that Reina and the children were safe. However, upon her arrival, Crystal discovered that the house was unnaturally quiet, and there was no response from within. This confirmed her darkest suspicions and set in motion a series of events that would eventually result in Pujol's arrest and subsequent conviction. The case of Victor Alexander Pujol serves as a sobering reminder of the potential for violence that lies dormant under the surface of intimate relationships, as well as the destructive consequences that such actions may have on families and communities. As soon as Reina's neighbors reported a bad odor coming from her house, the grisly details of the Victor Alexander Pujol case started to come to light. The smell, which was obviously that of decomposition, had become increasingly intolerable, which caused the community, which is quite close-knit, to become concerned and express fear. Eventually, the neighbors were unable to continue to ignore the developing odor, so they notified the authorities, which resulted in the intervention of the police. When the officers arrived at the site, they were greeted by a strong odor that verified the worst concerns that the neighbors had. They entered the house and found the lifeless bodies of Reina and her two children. Reina had been the mother of the children. It was a terrifying scene, and the brutality of the murders sent shockwaves throughout the town and beyond because of the severity of the crimes. The media swiftly picked up the story as soon as it became public knowledge that the killings had occurred, exposing the horrifying details and provoking popular indignation. Images of the crime scene and accounts of the devastating loss were broadcast continuously across the radio as part of the comprehensive coverage that was provided. It was determined that Victor Alexander Pujol, who had already been a subject of interest owing to his recent acts, was the major suspect. The response that Pujol gave to the media frenzy, on the other hand, was chillingly detached. Instead of displaying any symptoms of regret or concern, he appeared to be unmoved by the attention that was being paid to him and the seriousness of the situation that he was in. Following the extensive coverage that was provided by the media, Pujol's behavior became increasingly unstable. He started initiating communication with people he knew, including sending a number of messages to Miguel Uranium Arancini, a buddy he had known for a very long time. The fact that Pujol was aware of the ramifications that would inevitably result from his conduct was suggested by the fact that these messages were cryptic and disconnected. It was clear that he intended to surrender to the authorities on his own terms, since he communicated his intention through a combination of resignation and strategic planning. The manner in which Pujol organized his surrender was something that reflected serious deliberation rather than fear. This was a calculated act on his part. For the purpose of ensuring that his arrest would be carried out with as little confrontation as possible, he made contact with police authorities and furnished them with his whereabouts. Pujol exhibited a shocking lack of remorse when he was detained by the police during the investigation. The manner in which he carried himself was icy and dispassionate, as if he were only going through the motions of a normal operation. The confession that Pujol made to the authorities was precisely the same as the prior revelations that he had disclosed to Crystal. As he described his activities, he did not appear to be experiencing any feelings of shame or sadness. He acknowledged to the murders with a cool demeanor that was almost clinical in nature. These individuals who were following the case were even more disturbed by the lack of remorse, which painted a picture of a man who was entirely devoid of empathy. The case of Victor Alexander Pujol, with its stunning discovery and the premeditated surrender of the murderer, continues to serve as a sharp reminder of the most heinous parts of human nature. In light of the unfathomable tragedy that has occurred, it highlights the significance of remaining vigilant and the necessity for communities to provide support to one another. In Sunrise, Florida, Reina Isabel Encarnacion was born into a family that was full of love and support. During her childhood, she was the oldest of 3 siblings, and as a result, she frequently assumed the position of a guardian and a caregiver within her family. The qualities of compassion, resiliency, and drive were instilled in her by her parents, who were both persons who contributed to the family's success. The family managed to keep their tight link and support each other through the difficulties of life, despite the fact that they were experiencing financial difficulties. Reina was a student who was both intelligent and determined. Her academic performance was exceptional, and she never stopped working toward her goals. Even at a young age, it was clear that she had a strong desire to learn, and she had always envisioned herself working in the field of education. Reina went to the high school in the neighborhood, where she was an active participant in the student government as well as a number of different clubs. It was common for her instructors to comment on her leadership abilities and her capacity to motivate people who were in her immediate vicinity. Following her graduation from high school, she enrolled in a community college in the area and began her studies for a degree in early childhood education. Her objective was to pursue a career in education and have a constructive influence on the lives of children. During her early 20s, Reina came into contact with Daniel Bowden, a young guy who was both charming and ambitious. As time went on, the two fell in love with one another, and their relationship flourished. Having a common vision of constructing a future together, they decided to start a family not long after. Reina and Daniel were fortunate enough to have 2 lovely children, whom they cherished and cherished deeply. Reina enthusiastically embraced parenthood, and she managed to maintain a great balance between her academic pursuits and the duties she had to her family. Nevertheless, as time progressed, the relationship between Reina and Daniel started to show signs of deterioration. Their relationship was strained as a result of the strains of children and career aspirations, which led to frequent disputes between them. After some time, the couple made the decision to go their own ways, which resulted in a contentious custody fight over their children. The steadfast dedication that Reina exhibited as a mother was demonstrated by the fact that she worked tirelessly to provide her children with a secure and caring home. Despite the fact that the custody battle was emotionally exhausting, Reina stayed firm and focused on providing the best possible upbringing for her children. Following the breakup, Reina reconstructed her life with a strong sense of determination. To ensure that she could provide for her family, she pursued her education while also working part-time. In spite of the difficulties, Reina maintained her positive attitude and found happiness in the little moments she had with her children. Her loved ones and friends appreciated her for her bravery and commitment, and they frequently referred to her as a shining example of perseverance and optimism. It is a monument to Reina's persistent spirit and her love for her children that her life, despite being defined by difficulties, was a testament to her. A period of volatility and upheaval characterized the early years of Victor Alexander Pujol's life. Pujol had a childhood that was marked by neglect and sometimes acts of violence. He was born into a difficult household in an area with a high concentration of low-income residents. It was left up to him and his siblings to care for themselves because of the turbulent relationship between his parents and their frequent absences. At a young age, Pujol developed a sense of separation and rebellion as a result of his tumultuous upbringing. The path that Pujol took during his studies was, at best, irregular. As a result of his struggles with authority and his lack of interest in academics, he frequently skipped school and eventually left school when he was in his teens on multiple occasions. Pujol, who had few choices available to him, took on a number of low-paying occupations in order to make ends meet. His job history was marked by brief stints and repeated dismissals due to his erratic behavior and lack of dedication. His employment history was inconsistent. When Pujol was in his late teens, he discovered that the local motorcycle subculture provided him with a sense of belonging. In addition to providing him with a getaway from his turbulent history, the motorcycle lifestyle attracted to him because of its sense of freedom and brotherhood. As a result of his extensive involvement with a motorcycle club, he moved through the ranks of the organization very quickly. The subculture's emphasis on loyalty, brotherhood, and a spirit of defiance struck a chord with Pujol, and it played a significant role in forming a significant portion of his adult personality. On the other hand, this way of living brought him into intimate contact with illicit activities, which further ensnared him in a path that led to lawlessness and violence. The life of Reina, which is characterized by aspiration and perseverance, stands in stark contrast to Pujol's past, which is characterized by instability and a craving for acceptance. The terrible events that culminated in Reina's murder highlight the great differences in their life trajectories and the disastrous repercussions of their relationship. Their paths intersected, which culminated in the sad events involved in Reina's murder. The acquaintances of Reina Isabel Encarnacion and Victor Alexander Pujol came into contact with one another at a neighborhood gathering in Sunrise, Florida. The self-assured and defiant manner in which Pujol carried himself quickly piqued Reina's interest. Reina is distinguished for her warmth and friendliness. The first attraction was intense, despite the fact that their histories were very different from one another. However, from the very beginning of their relationship, they were very different from one another. Pujol was lured to the thrill of unpredictability and the freedom that his motorcycle subculture offered, whereas Reina was looking for stability and a future that was founded on mutual respect and shared aspirations. In the beginning, Reina's parents had a negative attitude toward Pujol. Concerns were expressed about his fitness as a potential mate for their daughter due to his turbulent background and his membership with a motorcycle club of some kind. On the other hand, Reina's parents grudgingly agreed to the relationship because of her steadfast faith in Pujol's ability and her desire to make a life with him. It was their hope that Reina's constructive influence would be able to guide Pujol in the direction of a path that was more stable and responsible. With the passage of time, they were aware of instances of genuine compassion and caring that occurred between the couple, and they provided them with cautious assistance. As time went on, the couple's relationship began to become strained due to the financial troubles they were experiencing. Pujol's uncertain job history and erratic financial contributions made it more difficult for Reina to pursue her study while also providing for her children. Reina's efforts were compounded by Pujol's contributions. There was a lack of consistency in income, which combined with the continual strain of bills and the expense of having children, created an environment that was unstable. Arguments around money grew more regular, with Pujol's irritation and feelings of inadequacy coming into conflict with Reina's efforts to maintain stability and hope in the middle of the situation. The underlying problems in their relationship were further worsened by these financial difficulties, which in turn laid the ground for the fatal events that were to take place shortly thereafter. A horrifying act of violence was committed by Victor Alexander Pujol on February 4th, which was the culmination of his rising frustrations and precarious nature. As soon as Pujol arrived at Reina's house, he pretended to be there to retrieve some clothes for the children, but his plans immediately shifted to something more sinister. Reina and her two small children were left lifeless as a result of his rage-fueled assault on them, which he carried out with brutality. In the future, the crime scene would disclose the extreme severity of his deeds, highlighting the extent of his unbridled rage and his disconnection from the world around him. On February 4th, the morning started off much like any other morning. The purpose of Pujol's visit to Reina's father's residence was apparently to retrieve some items that were intended for the children. On the other hand, this visit was calculated as part of his overall plan. Almost immediately after that, he made his way to Reina's residence. After entering, a confrontation took place, which ultimately resulted in the horrific murders. Following the commission of the horrible deed, Pujol exited the residence in an effort to put some space between himself and the site of the crime. Pujol worked to cover his tracks in the hours that followed the deaths by taking several actions. A tablet that belonged to one of the children was pawned by him, a move that would later prove to be crucial in establishing his connection to the criminal activity. After that, he confessed in his close friend Crystal, and in a terrifying confession, he admitted to having committed the killings. Attempting to visit Reina's house, Crystal was both frightened and determined to believe that what she had heard was not true. She phoned the authorities because she was unable to get admission, and because she was tremendously troubled by Pujol's confession. The neighbors called the police when they smelled decomposition coming from Reina's house. When police arrived, they found Reina and her children dead. Pujol's past and the pawned tablet led to him quickly. Media coverage fueled public outrage and grief. Pujol's communications to Miguel Uranium Arancini showed that he knew the consequences and had decided to capitulate strategically. Pujol's premeditation and lack of sorrow stunned society when he handed himself up. This reinforced his frigid, remorseless image. After all these years, the case of Victor Alexander Pujol remains a disturbing reminder of the dangerous ramifications of domestic abuse and the unaddressed consequences of rage and instability. The lives lost on that awful February day are a sad reminder of the fragility of human connections and the fatal events that might ensue from their breakdown. The investigation into Reina Isabel Encarnacion and her two children's terrible murder was swift and thorough. After the unfortunate victims were found, investigators quickly suspected Victor Alexander Pujol. Unpredictable behavior, the pawned tablet, and witness testimony were devastating evidence against Pujol. During interrogations, Pujol confessed in detail, recalling the events with disturbing clarity. He admitted that he went to Reina's house under false pretenses and killed in a fit of rage he couldn't control. The court ordered a psychiatric evaluation for Pujol due to the severity of the crime. An in-depth study revealed a man with a troubled past and major emotional issues. Despite knowing right from wrong, Pujol's mental profile showed impulsivity, anger management issues, and a lack of empathy. These discoveries provided context for his aggression, but they did not absolve him of culpability. The episode shocked, horrified, and outraged the public and media. The senseless murder of a young mother and her children struck a chord in the community and beyond. Every new tragedy was covered extensively by many news media, with reporters detailing the horrific facts and ongoing legal actions. Many individuals attended funerals and vigils to honor the victims, demonstrating the community's grief. The case sparked discussions about mental health, domestic abuse, and how the criminal justice system prevents tragedies like this. This high-profile Victor Alexander Pujol trial drew media attention and public interest. The prosecution used forensic evidence, Pujol's confession, and Crystal and Miguel Uranium, Arancini's admissions to build a strong case. The defense did not challenge Pujol's culpability, but they did highlight his rough past and psychiatric exam to reduce his guilt. Reina's friends and relatives described her as a faithful and loving mother whose life was tragically cut short. Their stories underlined the enormous loss everyone felt for her. Despite the defense's efforts, the jury rejected mercy arguments. Pujol admitted guilt in court despite strong evidence and painful testimony from victims' loved ones. His cold admission failed to generate sympathy. The judge punished the offenders severely because they realized the gravity of the crime and the need for justice. Victor Alexander Pujol was sentenced to life without parole, ensuring he would never harm others again. Sunrise, Florida was forever changed by the murders of Reina Isabel Encarnacion and her 7 children. The horrific act broke the community's sense of security and triggered a re-evaluation of mental health and domestic violence regulations. Members of Reina's family received emotional and financial support from the community. The case revealed major gaps in the criminal justice system's domestic violence prevention and response. Advocates wanted stricter protection measures, more mental health services, and better assistance for domestic violence victims. Legislators initially considered criminal code modifications. These amendments increased domestic violence penalties and improved monitoring of violent offenders. Reina's family felt relieved and sad after Pujol's punishment. Though they were grateful for justice, the sentence could not bring back their loved ones. They hoped Reina's story would inspire positive change and domestic abuse awareness. Many people shared these views and called for continuous efforts to protect vulnerable people and prevent future tragedies. The sad tale of Victor Alexander Pujol reminds us of the devastating impact of spousal abuse. This emphasizes the importance of staying attentive, obtaining community support, and changing the system to address the root causes of wicked crimes. Community thinking and action can prevent similar tragedies, honoring Reina and her children. Their memories would be honored this way. Thank you for watching. I recommend our other crime videos.